She stood in front of a mirror, a $1 million silk veil pinned to her hair, but her blood was running ice cold. Outside the cathedral doors waited a monster disguised as a billionaire. Her stepsister had run away, leaving her as the sacrificial lamb to a man whispered to be the king of the night. But what if the terrifying creature waiting at the altar didn't want the stepsister at all? What if this entire nightmare was perfectly orchestrated just for her? The Montgomery estate in Beacon Hill, Boston was usually a place of suffocating perfection, but tonight it felt like a tomb. Eliza Hayes was the quiet, unseen shadow of the house. Ever since her mother died and her father Arthur Hayes married Eleanor Montgomery, Eliza had been relegated to the background. Eleanor's biological daughter Victoria was the golden child, the debutante, the socialite, the flawless heir to the Montgomery shipping empire. Eliza was just the unfortunate baggage. But tonight, the golden child had done the unthinkable. She had run. It was 3 hours before the wedding of the century. The groom was Vincent Aldridge. If you read Forbes or the Wall Street Journal, Vincent was the elusive 30-something CEO of Aldridge Holdings, a man who owned half the real estate on the eastern seaboard and had his hands in global pharmaceuticals. He was famously reclusive, only attending board meetings via secure servers, only seen stepping out of blacked-out Maybachs in the dead of night. But in the hushed, terrified whispers of New England's true elite, the old blood families, Vincent Aldridge was something else entirely. He was the sovereign, the vampire king of the East. The Montgomery family had built their wealth a century ago on a pact with the Aldridge Coven. Wealth, protection, and power in exchange for a blood tribute every 3 generations. Victoria was the tribute. From the day she turned 18, she was groomed to be Vincent's bride, a gilded blood bag meant to secure the Montgomery Empire for another 100 years. But at 4 p.m. on her wedding day, Victoria's suite was empty. The window was open, a rope of tied silk sheets dangling over the rose trellis. She had eloped with a mortal tennis instructor named Chad, terrified of the immortal monster she was supposed to wed. The panic in the house was feral. Her stepmother Eleanor was weeping hysterically on the Persian rug, clutching a crumpled note Victoria had left behind. Her father Arthur was pacing the library, his face drained of all colour, sweating straight through his bespoke Tom Ford suit. "He will slaughter us!" Arthur gasped, his voice trembling so violently he sounded like a dying man. "Vincent doesn't just cancel contracts, Eleanor. He eradicates bloodlines. If there is no bride at the altar by nightfall, he will burn this house to the ground with us inside it." Eliza was standing in the doorway, holding a tray of chamomile tea she'd been told to brew for Eleanor's nerves. She watched them unravel, feeling a detached sense of pity. But then Eleanor's tear-streaked face snapped up. Her mascara was smeared, making her look demonic. Her eyes locked onto Eliza. "Eliza!" she breathed. The way she said Eliza's name made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Arthur stopped pacing. He turned slowly, his gaze raking over her. Eliza was 22, a year younger than Victoria. They didn't look identical, but they shared the same dark hair, the same pale complexion, with enough makeup, a heavy veil, and the dim candlelight of the cathedral. "No," Eliza said, taking a step back, the teacups rattling against the silver tray. "No, absolutely not. You cannot be serious." "Eliza, please," Arthur begged suddenly, closing the distance and gripping her shoulders with bruising force. "You owe us. I kept a roof over your head. I paid for your college. If you don't do this, we are dead. I am dead. She is a monster's bride, Dad. You want to feed me to a vampire?" Eliza screamed, trying to wrench herself free. "He doesn't care which of you it is," Eleanor shrieked, scrambling to her feet and grabbing Eliza's wrists. "It's a blood pact, Eliza. It just requires a daughter of this house. You have Arthur's blood. You qualify. You put on that dress right now, or I swear to God I will throw you out into the streets, and when Vincent comes for his revenge, I'll tell him exactly where to find you." The threat wasn't empty. The Aldridge Coven had eyes everywhere. The police couldn't protect her. The chief of police was practically on Vincent's payroll. For the next 2 hours, Eliza was treated like a doll going to the executioner's block. A team of terrified stylists was ushered in. They scrubbed her, powdered her, and violently pinned her hair into an intricate updo that pulled at her scalp. They laced her into Victoria's custom Vera Wang gown. It was a masterpiece of ivory silk and vintage lace, but it felt like a straitjacket. Because she was slightly curvier than Victoria, the corset had to be pulled so tight her ribs ached, stealing the air from her lungs. Finally, they dropped the heavy, opaque lace veil over her face. It obscured her vision, turning the world into a hazy, white-threaded nightmare. "Keep your head down," Eleanor hissed into her ear as she shoved a bouquet of blood-red roses into Eliza's trembling lace-gloved hands. "Do not speak unless spoken to. When it comes time for the vows, you whisper. If he realizes you aren't Victoria before the binding is complete, he will tear your throat out right there in the church." Eliza didn't cry. She was too paralyzed by sheer terror. As the black limousine carried her through the darkening streets of Boston toward the private ancient Gothic cathedral the Aldridges owned, she accepted her fate. She was going to die tonight. She was going to be discovered, and she was going to be drained dry by a monster. The cathedral was a fortress of black stone soaring into the night sky like jagged teeth. Inside, it was entirely lit by thousands of flickering white candles. There were no flowers, no cheerful music. The air smelled heavy of frankincense, myrrh, and something metallic like copper, like blood. The pews were filled with the Aldridge elite. She could feel their eyes on her as the heavy oak doors groaned open. They didn't look like movie monsters. They looked like royalty. Men in immaculate tailored suits, women in hauntingly beautiful dark gowns, their skin possessing an eerie porcelain perfection. But it was their stillness that gave them away. None of them fidgeted. None of them breathed. The pipe organ began to play a low, vibrating dirge that rattled her teeth. Arthur gripped her arm, his fingers digging painfully into her bicep as he marched her down the impossibly long aisle. Her knees threatened to buckle with every step. And then she saw him. Vincent Aldridge stood at the altar. He was terrifyingly tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a sharp, pitch-black tuxedo that seemed to absorb the candlelight. As they approached, he turned his head. Even through the thick mesh of her veil, his features struck her like a physical blow. He was devastatingly handsome with a jawline carved from marble and raven-dark hair swept back from his forehead. But his eyes were what froze the blood in her veins. They were a piercing, luminescent silver, predatory and ancient. Arthur stopped trembling so badly, he nearly dropped her arm. He didn't even look Vincent in the eye. He simply shoved her forward slightly and scrambled back toward the pews, abandoning her. Eliza stood alone before the sovereign. A high priest wearing dark crimson robes began speaking in Latin. The words washed over her in a dizzying wave. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Thump, 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 thump. The sound had to be deafening to a room full of vampires. Vincent stepped closer. His scent enveloped her, a masculine blend of cedarwood cold night air and an underlying intoxicating metallic sweetness. "Give me your hand," his voice resonated. It wasn't loud, but it possessed a quiet, absolute authority that vibrated in her chest. It was a voice that commanded empires. Eliza hesitantly raised her trembling, gloved hand. He took it. His skin was freezing. It felt like holding smooth, polished marble left out in the winter snow. Yet the moment his fingers curled around hers, a strange electric jolt shot up her arm. She paused, his thumb gently brushing over her knuckles. She held her breath, waiting for him to rip her glove off and expose her. But he didn't. He held her hand firmly as the priest presented a silver chalice and an ornate, ruby-hilted dagger. "The blood is the life," the priest intoned in English. "By the blood the pact is sealed. By the blood two become one. Speak the vows." Vincent took the dagger. He didn't even flinch as he drew the blade across his own palm. Dark, almost black crimson blood welled to the surface. He held his bleeding hand out over the chalice, letting a few drops fall inside. Then he turned to her. He reached out and gently lifted the edge of her heavy lace veil. Her heart stopped. This was it. He was going to look at her face, realize she wasn't the blonde, blue-eyed Victoria, and kill her. He flipped the veil back. The cool cathedral air hit her flushed, tear-stained face. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the agony of his fangs. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the altar. Eliza slowly opened her eyes. Vincent was staring down at her. His silver eyes roamed over her dark hair. Her brown eyes, her terrified, quivering lips. She saw a flicker of something cross his immortal features. Not rage, not betrayal. It was something else, a sudden, sharp intake of breath. The king of the night, who had lived for over 500 years, actually looked stunned. "Do you," she whispered, her voice breaking fully, expecting her death sentence. "Do you want me to?" Before she could finish, Vincent moved. He didn't shout for the guards. He didn't attack. Instead, he stepped impossibly close, his large body shielding her from the view of the congregation. He took the dagger, and with a surprisingly gentle touch, he pressed the blunt edge of it to her thumb. Just a prick. He murmured, his voice so low only she could hear it. It sounded soft. He made a tiny incision on her thumb. A single drop of her bright red blood welled up. He guided her hand over the chalice, letting the drop fall and mix with his. "I, Vincent Aldridge." His voice boomed through the cathedral, commanding an absolute. "Take you, Eliza Hayes, as my eternal wife, my equal, my queen, from this night until the end of time." A collective gasp echoed through the pews. Not because of a wrong bride, but because he had just named her queen, a title no mortal tribute was ever supposed to receive. And more importantly, he knew her name. Eliza, not Victoria. He had said Eliza. Eliza stared at him, her mouth slightly parted in shock. How did he know her name? The contract was for the Montgomery girl. She was a nobody. "Your turn, little bird." He whispered softly, his silver eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Say the words. Tie yourself to me, and I swear no harm will ever come to you." She was mesmerized, terrified, and utterly confused. She looked at the chalice, then up at his impossibly handsome face. I, Eliza Hayes," she stammered, her voice trembling, "take you, Vincent, as my husband." "Drink," the priest commanded, offering the chalice. Vincent took it first. He brought the silver rim to his lips and drank their mingled blood without breaking eye contact with her. Then, he offered it to her. She took the heavy cup. It smelled of copper and old wine. Closing her eyes, she took a small sip. It tasted like metallic fire sliding down her throat, instantly warming her freezing body. "It is done," the priest declared. "The sovereign has chosen." Vincent took the chalice from her shaking hands and handed it away. Then, before she could process what was happening, he wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his hard, freezing chest, and pressed his lips to hers. It wasn't a brutal kiss. It was possessive, deep, and searingly gentle. His lips were cold, but his touch ignited a raging fire under her skin. When he finally pulled away, her head was spinning. "Let's go home, wife," he murmured. The ride to the Aldridge estate was spent in agonizing silence. They were seated in the back of an elongated, armored Rolls-Royce. The privacy divider was up. Outside, the rain had started to pour, blurring the neon lights of the highway as they drove deep into the secluded mountainous region of upstate New York. Eliza sat pressed against the furthest door, clutching her bouquet so tightly her knuckles were white. The heavy wedding dress was suffocating her. Vincent sat casually on the other side, a crystal glass of amber liquid bourbon, not blood to her surprise, in his hand. He was watching her. She could feel his silver gaze tracking every shallow breath she took. "You can take the veil off completely, Eliza," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like velvet. "You're safe now." She flinched at her name. She reached up with trembling hands and pulled the dozens of bobby pins out, finally tossing the heavy lace onto the leather seat. She ran her hands through her messed up dark hair, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "Why didn't you kill me?" she asked, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "You knew. You looked at me and you knew I wasn't Victoria. Why did you accept me? Vincent took a slow sip of his bourbon. He didn't look angry. If anything, he looked incredibly tired, but deeply satisfied. I knew Victoria Montgomery, he said dismissively. I have had dossiers on her since she was 10 years old. Spoiled, vain, cruel. She would have made a terrible companion for eternity. When your father brought you down the aisle, terrified and shaking like a leaf in a hurricane, I realized your family had made a desperate mistake. A mistake that worked entirely in my favor. So you just took me because I was there. She whispered, feeling a fresh wave of humiliation. She was just a convenient replacement. A warm body. A dark, unreadable emotion flashed across his eyes. He set his glass down, leaning forward slightly. The proximity made her breath hitch. No, Eliza, he said softly, his gaze dropping to her lips before rising back to her eyes. I didn't take you because you were just there. Before she could ask what he meant, the car slowed. The heavy iron gates of the Aldridge estate loomed out of the fog. It wasn't just a mansion. It was a sprawling Gothic castle, carved directly into the side of a mountain surrounded by dense black pine forests. Gargoyles perched on the parapets, and the massive oak doors looked strong enough to withstand a siege. When the car parked, Alistair, Vincent's second in command, a terrifyingly tall vampire with a scar across his pale cheek, opened her door. The rain was pouring, but before a single drop could hit her, Vincent was there. He shrugged off his custom suit jacket and draped it over her bare, shivering shoulders. It swallowed her whole, smelling fiercely of him. He didn't make her walk. He scooped her up into his arms, effortlessly despite the massive, heavy dress. Put me down, she gasped instinctively, wrapping her arms around his neck to steady herself. The cobblestones are wet, and those heels look like torture devices, he replied calmly, striding up the massive stone steps. Inside the manor was staggering. It wasn't the dark, cobweb-filled dungeon she expected. It was breathtakingly modern, yet steeped in history. High vaulted ceilings, massive crystal chandeliers, roaring fireplaces, and priceless Renaissance art lining the halls. A staff of silent, pale individuals bowed slightly as they passed. Vincent carried her up a grand, sweeping staircase and down a long, dimly lit corridor. He finally set her down in front of a set of massive mahogany doors. These are your chambers, he said, opening the doors. She walked in and gasped. It was a suite fit for a modern empress. A massive king-sized bed with silk sheets, a roaring fire in a marble hearth, a walk-in closet the size of an apartment, and a sprawling ensuite bathroom with a sunken clawfoot tub. Tomorrow my tailors will arrive to measure you for a proper wardrobe. Throw that ridiculous dress in the fire, Vincent said, leaning against the doorframe. Where are you sleeping? She asked nervously, clutching his jacket around her shoulders. In my quarters, at the end of the hall. He noticed her panic. Eliza, look at me. She hesitantly met his gaze. I am an apex predator, yes. I have done terrible things in my long life. But I do not force myself on terrified women. You are my wife. The coven recognizes you. You will not be harmed, you will not be bitten against your will, and you will not be treated like a prisoner. Rest. With that, he closed the door, leaving her alone in the luxurious silent room. She stood there for a long time, her mind reeling. She was alive. She was the wife of a vampire king, and he was treating her better than her own human family ever had. Needing to get out of the corset, she struggled with the laces for 20 minutes before finally peeling the heavy dress off. She found a silk robe in the closet and wrapped it tightly around herself. She couldn't sleep. The adrenaline was still pumping violently through her veins. She began to pace the massive suite, inspecting her new gilded cage. There was a large antique writing desk near the window. Out of sheer nervous habit, she opened the top drawer. Inside, there were no pens or paper. There was only a single velvet-lined mahogany box. Her curiosity got the better of her. She unlatched the tiny gold lock and opened the lid. What she saw inside made her heart stop dead in her chest. Resting on the dark velvet was a cheap, tarnished silver locket shaped like a star. A locket she had lost 12 years ago at a public park in Boston. Next to it was a faded Polaroid photo. It was a picture of her, She was 18, sitting in a coffee shop reading a book. Then another photo, her at 20 walking in the rain holding a broken umbrella. Then another taken just last month, her looking out the window of the Montgomery estate. Underneath the photos was a stack of handwritten letters. They were all addressed to Eliza. The handwriting was elegant, sharp, and distinctly male. She picked up the top letter. It was dated 5 years ago. They keep parading the blonde girl Victoria in front of my emissaries. They think she is the prize. They don't see the quiet girl in the shadows. They don't see you. They don't know that I have watched you since you were 10 years old, Eliza. They don't know that the only reason I haven't burned the Montgomery Empire to the ground yet is because you live in that house. I will bide my time. I will let them think they are in control. But soon, little bird, you will come home to me. The paper slipped from her trembling fingers, fluttering to the floor. He didn't just accept her tonight because Victoria ran away. Victoria running away wasn't an accident. This whole time, the pact, the marriage, the terror, it was never about her. It was always Eliza. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut, but the sound echoed in Eliza's ears like a gunshot. She stood frozen in the center of the sprawling suite, the velvet-lined box resting on the desk, the Polaroids scattered around it like pieces of a stalker's shrine. He had been watching her. Her mind scrambled to piece together the shattered fragments of her reality. Victoria's sudden reckless elopement with Chad the tennis pro. The precise timing of her disappearance just hours before the wedding, leaving her father no choice but to offer Eliza in her place. It hadn't been a stroke of tragic luck. It was a calculated, flawless trap. Your heart rate is climbing, Eliza. You sound like a trapped rabbit. She whipped around. Vincent was standing on the balcony terrace attached to her suite. The glass doors were open, the cold, rain-slicked wind billowing the heavy silk curtains around him. He had taken off his jacket and tie. The top 3 buttons of his black dress shirt were undone, revealing the pale, flawless expanse of his chest. He didn't look like a monster in the dark. He looked like a dark god completely at ease in the shadows. You knew, she choked out, stepping back until her spine hit the edge of the antique desk. You orchestrated everything. Victoria, Chad. Vincent stepped into the room, his movements entirely silent. Chad is immortal, with a gambling addiction and a penchant for fast cars. It cost me exactly $3 million wired to an offshore account in the Caymans to convince him that Victoria Montgomery was his soulmate. I bought them the plane tickets to Tuscany myself. Eliza's jaw dropped. The sheer audacity of his confession stole the air from her lungs. You paid a man to kidnap my stepsister. I didn't kidnap anyone. Vincent replied, his voice a smooth, dangerous purr as he closed the distance between them. I simply provided an exit door for a spoiled, terrified girl who never wanted to marry me in the first place. I knew Arthur would panic. I knew he was too cowardly to face my wrath, and I knew he would look at the quiet, resilient daughter he had abused and ignored for 12 years and throw her to the wolves to save his own skin. Why? Tears of frustration and shock prickled her eyes. Why go through all of this? If you wanted me, why not just demand me the pact? The pact was for the Montgomery heir. Vincent interrupted, his silver eyes flashing with sudden possessive intensity. He stopped just inches from her. The cold radiating from his body was intoxicating, smelling of petrichor and power. You are a haze. Arthur's blood, but not Eleanor's. The Coven Council is rigid, ancient. They demanded the golden child of the Montgomery line. If I had demanded the bastard daughter, they would have seen it as a weakness, a deviation from the blood treaty. They would have targeted you. I couldn't protect you if you were a breach of contract. He reached out his freezing fingertips, gently brushing a stray tear from her cheek. She shivered, paralyzed by the electric shock of his touch. So I made Arthur breach the contract. Vincent murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips. I made him offer you to me in front of the entire council. He gave you to me freely. You saved his life, and in doing so, you became my undisputed queen. No one can touch you now. She looked down at the tarnished silver star locket resting in the velvet box. You've had this for 12 years. I lost it at the Boston Commons when I was 10. You were crying, Vincent said softly, his voice losing its terrifying edge, becoming something achingly tender. Eleanor had slapped you for spilling ice cream on Victoria's dress. You ran to the duck pond bleeding from where your lip had split. I was passing through the park. Hunting. I smelled your blood, Eliza. It was the sweetest, most maddening scent I had encountered in 5 centuries. I found you sitting on a bench, but you weren't acting like prey. You wiped your face, sat up straight, and promised yourself you would survive them. He picked up the locket, his massive hand dwarfing the cheap metal. I have shadowed you ever since. I have watched you endure them. I have killed 3 men who tried to follow you home from your night classes in the city. I built this empire. I amassed this power specifically to create a world where I could pull you out of the shadows and place a crown on your head. Her knees finally gave out. Vincent caught her effortlessly, his strong arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. "You're a psychopath," she whispered shakily into his shirt. "I am a vampire, Eliza." He corrected gently, burying his face in her dark hair, breathing in her scent like a starving man. "And I am entirely yours." 3 weeks later, the Aldridge estate was transformed from a quiet, brooding fortress into a magnificent spectacle. It was the winter solstice, the most sacred night in the immortal calendar, and the night she was to be formally presented to the high society of the damned as the sovereign queen. Eliza sat in front of a gilded vanity mirror as a team of silent, pale handmaidens finished her preparation. Vincent had kept his promise. She had not been treated like a prisoner. She was treated like a deity. Her wardrobe was filled with custom Chanel and Dior, her meals prepared by Michelin-star chefs, and Vincent. Vincent was a revelation. He was fiercely protective, yet terrifyingly gentle. They spent their evenings in the Grand Library, playing chess and drinking 1940s Bordeaux. He never pushed her. He never demanded blood. He simply basked in her presence, though the heavy, hungry looks he gave her when he thought she wasn't paying attention told her his restraint was costing him dearly. "The sovereign awaits my queen." Alistair Vincent's imposing second-in-command murmured from the doorway. Eliza stood up. The dress Vincent had chosen for her was breathtaking. It was deep blood ruby velvet that clung to her curves with a sweeping train and off-the-shoulder sleeves. Around her neck rested the Aldridge heart, a flawless 50-carat diamond necklace that felt heavy with history. When she reached the top of the grand staircase, Vincent was waiting at the bottom. He wore a tailored midnight blue tuxedo looking devastatingly lethal. When his silver eyes locked onto her, the entire crowded ballroom below went deathly silent. Hundreds of immortals, the elite of the East Coast, stopped breathing. Vincent ascended the stairs, halfway offering his hand. As she took it, he kissed her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "You are magnificent," he whispered. "I'm terrified," she whispered back. "Don't be. You hold their lives in the palm of your hand." They descended into the ballroom. The sea of vampires parted for them, bowing their heads in deep reverence. It was a dizzying display of wealth and predatory grace. But as they crossed the floor, a jarring sight caught her eye. Standing near the massive ice sculptures were 2 humans looking completely out of place and utterly terrified. Arthur and Eleanor. Her stepmother looked gaunt, her designer gown hanging loosely on her frame. Arthur was clutching a glass of champagne with violently shaking hands. They had been summoned to formalize the end of the Montgomery tribute. As Vincent guided Eliza toward them, Eleanor's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. She took in the ruby velvet, the priceless diamonds, the absolute authority radiating from the way Vincent held Eliza. She had expected to find a drained corpse. Instead, she was looking at royalty. "Eliza!" Arthur choked out, almost dropping his glass. You're alive." Eliza said, her voice cool and steady, surprising even herself. The 12 years of cowering in their house felt like a distant nightmare. Standing beside Vincent, she felt invincible. "How is this possible?" Eleanor hissed, her toxic jealousy overriding her survival instinct. She glared at Eliza's necklace. "That belongs to the Montgomery line Victoria was supposed to..." Silence. Vincent's voice wasn't loud, but it cracked through the air like a bullwhip. The entire ballroom froze. The temperature in the room plummeted 20 degrees. Vincent's silver eyes flared with a terrifying, unearthly light as he stared Eleanor down. "You address the Queen of the East with respect, mortal, or I will have your tongue removed and served to the hounds," Vincent snarled softly. Eleanor snapped her mouth shut, her face draining of all blood. Arthur immediately dropped to his knees, pulling Eleanor down with him. "Forgive us, Lord Aldridge. We meant no disrespect." Before Vincent could dismiss them, a tall blonde vampire with a cruel smirk stepped out of the crowd. It was Darius, the head of the rival Southern Coven. He was notoriously ambitious and deeply resentful of Vincent's power. "Come now, Vincent," Darius sneered, circling them like a shark. "Threatening your in-laws, and over what a substitution. She is a lovely little blood bag, I'll admit, but naming a human bastard as queen. The council has concerns. She hasn't even been turned." Darius moved impossibly fast, appearing suddenly at Eliza's side, his cold hand reaching out to touch her bare shoulder. "Let's see what makes her so special, shall we?" He never touched her. In a blur of motion too fast for the human eye to track, Vincent intercepted. A sickening crack echoed through the silent ballroom. Eliza gasped. Vincent had Darius by the throat, hoisting the massive 6'4" vampire completely off the marble floor with one hand. Vincent's face had transformed. His fangs were fully descended, his veins glowing black beneath his pale skin. He was a creature of absolute primeval violence. "Touch my wife, Darius!" Vincent roared, his voice vibrating the crystal chandeliers above them. "And I will rip your spine out through your throat and beat your coven to death with it." Darius choked, his eyes bulging as he clawed helplessly at Vincent's iron grip. "She is your queen. You will bow to her or you will burn. Choose," Vincent commanded. He threw Darius to the floor. The rival lord scrambled to his knees, gasping for air, his arrogance entirely shattered. Trembling, Darius bowed his head to the marble directly at Eliza's feet. "My queen," Darius rasped. Vincent straightened his cuffs, his terrifying visage instantly melting back into the handsome, composed billionaire. He turned to Eliza, offering his arm with a soft, reassuring smile. "Shall we dance, my love?" Eliza placed her trembling hand on his arm, stepping over a kneeling Darius, and let the vampire king sweep her across the dance floor. Winter bled into early spring, and Eliza's life at the Aldridge estate became a beautiful, surreal dream. The fear had completely evaporated, replaced by a deep, undeniable love for the monster who worshipped the ground she walked on. Vincent was her shadow, her protector, and her confidant. But the past is a stubborn ghost, and hers came knocking at 3 a.m. during a violent thunderstorm. She was curled up against Vincent's chest in his massive bed, listening to the steady, slow rhythm of his immortal heart, when Alistair breached the private chambers. He didn't knock. He phased through the heavy oak doors looking grim. "My apologies, Sovereign." Alistair bowed low. "There is a disturbance at the outer gates. A mortal woman is demanding entry. She claims to be your rightful bride." Vincent's eyes snapped open in the dark, flashing silver. He tightened his grip on her. "Victoria." Eliza sat up, clutching the silk sheets. "What is she doing here? You sent her to Italy." It appears the tennis instructor's devotion was tied strictly to the bank account, Vincent said, dryly getting out of bed and slipping into a silk robe. "Bring her to the Great Hall, Alistair. Let us put this nuisance to rest once and for all." Eliza dressed quickly, in a dark, structured dress, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Victoria had always taken everything from her. Her father's love, her mother's jewelry, her peace of mind. A tiny, irrational voice in her head whispered that she had come to take Vincent too. When they entered the Great Hall, Victoria looked nothing like the flawless golden child of Beacon Hill. She was drenched from the rain, her designer coat ruined, her blonde hair matted. She looked manic desperate. When she saw them walking down the grand staircase, her eyes locked onto Eliza. Her jaw dropped. "Eliza!" she gasped. You're not dead. You're glowing." Hello, Victoria, Eliza said calmly, standing tall beside Vincent. Victoria's gaze snapped to Vincent. The terror in her eyes was momentarily eclipsed by greed. She saw the opulence, the power, the sheer devastating beauty of the immortal king she had abandoned. Chad had dumped her, stolen her money, and left her penniless in Florence. She had come crawling back to the monster, assuming she could simply step into the role of billionaire's pampered pet. Vincent, Victoria cried, taking a step forward. I was kidnapped. That awful man forced me away on our wedding day, but I fought my way back to you. I am here to fulfill the pact. I am the Montgomery heir. I am your true bride. Vincent looked at her with an expression of such profound boredom and disgust it made Eliza shiver. You ran, Victoria, Vincent stated coldly. You breached the pact. Eliza fulfilled it. The matter is closed. No, Victoria shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Eliza. She is a fraud. She's not a Montgomery. She has no claim to this wealth, to this power. The council demands the blood of the true heir. I offer my blood to the king. She pulled a small silver pocket knife from her coat, likely stolen, and hastily slashed her own palm. She held it out, panting. Drink. Take my blood. Take your rightful queen. The smell of mortal blood hit the air. In the shadows of the great hall, several of the vampire guards shifted their eyes, turning dark. But Vincent didn't even flinch. He didn't look hungry. He looked insulted. Your blood smells of copper and deceit, Vincent sneered. But suddenly the massive double doors of the hall swung open. 3 figures shrouded in heavy grey cloaks glided into the room. It was the Coven Council elders. They had been visiting the estate for the spring equinox. The mortal girl invokes the right of the true heir. The lead elder hissed his voice, sounding like dry leaves over stone. She offers Montgomery blood. By our ancient laws, sovereign if her blood is purer, she holds the claim to the throne. Eliza's heart stopped. She looked up at Vincent, panic finally breaking through her calm facade. Vincent's jaw clenched. I have claimed Eliza. She is my wife. The pact was for the Montgomery line, the elder insisted. Let the false bride bleed. We shall compare the scent. If she is inferior, she must be discarded. Victoria smiled, a wicked, triumphant smile that Eliza remembered from her childhood. She thought she had won. Vincent stepped in front of Eliza, shielding her. I will not allow you to bleed her for your amusement. Vincent, wait, Eliza whispered, stepping out from behind him. She wasn't going to hide anymore. She wasn't going to let Victoria strip her of the one place she truly belonged. It's fine. Let them see. Vincent looked at her, his eyes filled with a fierce protective agony. But he nodded slowly. He took her hand, produced a clean silver dagger, and made a tiny painless nick on her wrist. A single drop of her bright crimson blood welled to the surface. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. The moment the scent of her blood hit the air, the entire great hall fell into absolute paralyzed silence. Victoria's blood had smelled like standard iron-rich human blood. Eliza's blood smelled like crushed roses, lightning, and pure, intoxicating ancient magic. The 3 council elders physically staggered backward, their hoods falling away to reveal expressions of utter awe and terror. Several of the elite guards dropped to their knees, bowing their heads, unable to withstand the overwhelming, intoxicating aura. By the night, the lead elder whispered, his red eyes wide. The Rosicrucian line, the blood of the first seers. We thought that bloodline went extinct 3 centuries ago. Victoria looked around, wildly confused and terrified, as the vampires who had been ignoring her were now kneeling before Eliza. What does that mean, I'm the heir? You are a sack of common dirt, the elder spat at Victoria, before falling to his knees and bowing deeply to Eliza. Forgive us, true queen. Your blood is 1,000 times more precious than the Montgomery filth. Vincent smiled a predatory, fiercely proud smile. He brought Eliza's bleeding wrist to his lips, his tongue darting out to gently soothe the cut, sealing it instantly. He looked at Victoria, who was now sobbing, clutching her bleeding, ignored hand. Alistair, Vincent commanded, his voice echoing with absolute finality. Escort Miss Montgomery out. Strip her of her coat. Drop her in the center of the woods. Let us see if the golden child can run as fast as she claims." As Victoria screamed and was dragged away into the storm, Vincent wrapped his arms around Eliza, pulling her against his chest. She looked up at the man who had orchestrated the ruin of her abusers to place a crown on her head. "I told you, little bird," he murmured, his silver eyes shining with endless devotion. "You were always the prize." The revelation of her bloodline sent shockwaves through the immortal underworld, but inside the fortified walls of the Aldridge estate, it triggered an entirely different kind of storm. Eliza was no longer just the mortal wife of the sovereign. She was an anomaly. The Rosicrucian line, a lineage of ancient seers whose blood possessed untamed magic, was thought to have been eradicated during the Salem trials. Within days, the physical changes began. It started as a low-grade fever, a burning sensation behind her eyes. Then came the heightened senses. She could hear the steady rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock 3 rooms away. She could smell the distinct metallic tang of a thunderstorm, rolling in hours before the first dark cloud appeared over the New York mountains. But the most terrifying change was the visions. They struck without warning, violently pulling her out of reality. One afternoon, while sitting in the Grand Library reading a first edition copy of Wuthering Heights, she touched the leather binding, and the world vanished. She didn't see the library. She saw fire. She saw the massive steel gates of their estate blown off their hinges. She saw men in tactical combat gear bearing the insignia of Constellis, a real-world private military contractor often used by offshore billionaires storming the grounds. They were armed with high-lumen UV pulse rifles and silver-jacketed ammunition. And leading them cloaked in a heavily shaded tactical SUV was Darius. Eliza snapped back to reality, gasping for air, the book tumbling from her hands to the floor. Vincent was there in a fraction of a second, his hands gripping her shoulders, his silver eyes wide with frantic concern. "Eliza, breathe. Look at me," he commanded softly, pressing his cool forehead against hers. "They're coming." She choked out, her heart hammering against her ribs. Darius. He didn't submit. He went underground. He's using shell companies in Mayfair and the Cayman Islands to hire mortal mercenaries. They are going to attack the estate during the day, Vincent, when the coven is asleep and weakened by the sun. Vincent's expression hardened into a mask of pure, lethal ice. He didn't doubt her for a single second. "When?" "Tomorrow, at high noon." Vincent stood up, the air in the library instantly dropping to freezing temperatures. "Alistair!" he roared. The tall vampire materialized in the doorway, bowing. "Initiate a total daytime lockdown," Vincent ordered, his voice echoing with military precision. "I want the titanium shutters drawn on every window. Arm the perimeter with the automated defense grid. Trace Darius's offshore accounts, check the wire transfers through the Swiss routing networks. Find out exactly which PMC he bought." Alistair hesitated. "Sovereign, if Darius is bringing mortal mercenaries armed with UV technology, it is a breach of the Geneva Conventions of our kind. It is an act of total war." "Then we will give them a slaughter," Vincent said softly, looking back at Eliza. "He thinks he can use human pawns to kill my queen while I am bound by the daylight. He is gravely mistaken." But as the night wore on, Eliza's anxiety deepened. She had seen something else in that vision, a flash of blonde hair amongst the mercenaries. Victoria. Vincent had banished her to the woods, expecting her to flee back to the miserable human existence she deserved. But he had underestimated the sheer venomous spite of a spoiled golden child. She hadn't run back to Boston. She had stumbled through the forest until she was found by Darius's scouts. She traded the only thing she had left, her intimate knowledge of the Montgomery Aldridge security protocols. She knew the blind spots in the human-operated perimeter. Eliza sat by the massive fireplace in their suite, wrapped in Vincent's arms. He was brushing her dark hair, his touch infinitely gentle compared to the violence he was preparing for. "If she is with them, Vincent," Eliza whispered, staring into the flames. "If Victoria is there, I don't want you to hold back." Vincent paused. For 12 years, Eliza had been the victim. She had taken the emotional abuse, the slaps, the degrading comments from Eleanor and Victoria, swallowing her pride just to survive. But the terrified girl from Beacon Hill was dead. She had died the moment Vincent placed his blood on her tongue. "I won't," he promised, his fangs grazing the shell of her ear, sending a shiver of electricity down her spine. "No one who touches my queen lives to see the sunset." The attack began exactly at 12 p.m. The sun was beating down relentlessly on the mountain estate. Most of the immortal guards were in the subterranean catacombs entering their daily torpor. Only Vincent Alistair and a handful of elite guards remained awake in the heavily shaded central keep, fighting the agonizing lethargy the daylight forced upon their kind. Eliza was in the command center, with Vincent watching the CCTV monitors. The feed cut to static one by one. Then the ground shook. A massive detonation echoed through the valley, rattling the priceless chandeliers. The outer gates had been breached with C4 plastic explosives. Thermal imaging shows 40 combatants. Alistair reported his fingers flying across a multi-million-dollar surveillance console. "They are deploying UV flashbangs and incendiary phosphorus grenades. They're trying to burn the manor down around us. Let them try to breach the inner sanctum." Vincent sneered, his skin paler than usual, his veins standing out starkly against his neck as he fought the daylight weakness. The walls are reinforced with 3 feet of steel and concrete. But then, a localized alarm blared. "Sir," Alistair's voice tightened. "The West Wing service tunnels. Someone bypassed the biometric locks." Victoria. She knew about the old service tunnels used by the mortal staff. Before Vincent could issue a command, the heavy titanium doors of the command center groaned. The distinct, terrifying hiss of cutting torches began eating through the metal. They were already inside. "Alistair, take the guards to the choke points. Slaughter them all." Vincent commanded, drawing a pair of ancient, silver-etched broadswords from a weapons rack. He turned to Eliza, his eyes burning with frantic devotion. "Stay behind me, Eliza. Do not move." The steel doors blew inward with a deafening crash, filling the room with blinding artificial ultraviolet light. The vampires guarding the perimeter screamed as the UV rays blistered their skin instantly. Heavily armed mercenaries poured into the room, their assault rifles barking. Vincent moved like a shadow through a strobe light. Despite the agonizing burns forming on his skin from the UV lamps, he tore through the heavily armored men. Swords flashed blood-sprayed, and the screams of dying men echoed over the gunfire. It was a terrifying display of an apex predator defending his mate. But there were too many, and the UV light was draining his immense power. Through the chaos, 2 figures stepped into the command center untouched by the carnage. Darius, wearing a heavy lead-lined coat and dark polarized glasses to protect himself from the ambient sunlight bleeding through the breached walls, and beside him, Victoria. She was dressed in tactical black, holding a specialized UV strobe pistol. She looked manic, her eyes sunken, a twisted smile playing on her lips. "Look at you, Eliza," Victoria sneered, stepping over the body of a dead mercenary. "Playing house with a monster. Did you really think you could steal my life and get away with it?" "It was never your life, Victoria," Eliza said, her voice eerily calm despite the battlefield around her. "You threw it away because you were a coward." Darius chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Enough family reunions. The Sovereign is currently occupied." Darius pointed. Vincent was pinned against the far wall by 6 mercenaries utilizing high-tension carbon fiber net launchers designed specifically to restrain immortals. He was roaring in fury, tearing through the netting, but the concentrated UV spotlights they had trained on him were burning his flesh, suppressing his strength. "I will tear your heart out, Darius!" Vincent bellowed, his fangs fully extended, his silver eyes glowing with murderous rage. "You will die in the sun, Vincent," Darius mocked. He turned his predatory gaze to Eliza. "But first, I will drain the seer. With the Rosicrucian blood in my veins, the entire eastern seaboard will bow to me. The ancient magic will make me a god." Darius lunged at Eliza. He was impossibly fast, his cold hand wrapping around her throat like a vice. He lifted her off the ground, bringing his fangs dangerously close to her jugular. Victoria laughed. Do it, bleed her dry. But as Darius's fangs grazed Eliza's skin, a surge of adrenaline and ancient power erupted from her core. The visions hadn't just been warnings. They were an awakening of a dormant, explosive psychic energy. Eliza grabbed Darius's wrists. She didn't try to pry them away. Instead, she pushed her mind into his. She unleashed a torrent of pure, unadulterated psychic fire directly into the ancient vampire's brain. She showed him every prophecy, every death, every apocalyptic nightmare her bloodline had guarded for 1,000 years. She flooded his consciousness with the blinding atomic weight of eternity. Darius screamed. It wasn't a roar of pain. It was a shriek of absolute mind-shattering terror. He dropped her, stumbling backward, clawing at his own eyes. Blood began to pour from his tear ducts. "Make it stop! Make it stop!" He wailed, falling to his knees as his immortal brain short-circuited under the psychic assault. Victoria stared in utter horror, her gun dropping to the floor. What did you do to him?" Vincent, fueled by the sight of Eliza's attack, let out a monstrous roar. Tapping into the deepest reserves of his ancient power, he completely shattered the carbon fiber net. He ignored the burning UV lights. He moved so fast he displaced the air in the room, creating a sonic boom. He materialized behind the kneeling, weeping Darius. "I warned you," Vincent whispered. With one brutal, effortless motion, Vincent grabbed Darius by the hair and severed his head from his shoulders with his bare hands. The command center fell into a deathly silence, save for the crackle of burning electronics and the ragged breathing of the surviving mercenaries, who immediately dropped their weapons and fell to their knees, surrendering the moment their employer was decapitated. Victoria backed away, her hands raised, trembling violently as she bumped into the wall. Vincent stood amidst the carnage, chest heaving. His midnight blue shirt was in tatters, his pale skin covered in horrific, blistering burns from the UV exposure. He was swaying on his feet, his immortal healing factor severely compromised by the concentrated ultraviolet radiation and the silver shrapnel embedded in his shoulders. Eliza ran to him, ignoring the gore on the floor, and caught him as his knees buckled. "Vincent," she cried, lowering his massive frame to the floor. His skin was unnaturally cold, his silver eyes dimming. "I'm all right, little bird," he rasped, reaching up with a trembling hand to cup her cheek. You are magnificent. A true queen." "You're not healing," she panicked, seeing the burns stubbornly refusing to close. The UV damage was too extensive. "It takes time," he whispered, coughing, a speck of dark blood appearing on his lips. "The sun. It drains the life force." Eliza didn't hesitate. She rolled up the sleeve of her silk blouse, exposing her wrist. "Drink." Vincent's eyes widened slightly. "Eliza, no. The battle is over. I will not feed from you while you are in distress." "Drink it, Vincent," she ordered, her voice leaving no room for argument. "My blood isn't just human. It's Rosicrucian. It's magic. Take it." She pressed her wrist directly against his lips. He groaned, the sheer proximity of her scent overwhelming his battered senses. Slowly, delicately, his fangs extended. He pierced her skin. The moment he began to draw her blood, a visible shockwave of energy rippled through the room. Eliza gasped, not from pain, but from the intense, euphoric rush of the bond cementing between them. The ancient magic in her veins poured into him like liquid fire. Before her eyes, the horrific UV burns on Vincent's chest and face began to rapidly seal. The silver shrapnel was pushed out of his muscles, clattering onto the floor. The dimness in his silver eyes was replaced by a blinding, luminescent glow. He wasn't just healing, he was becoming stronger. The seer's blood was elevating him to a tier of power no vampire had reached in a millennia. When he finally pulled away, the wound on her wrist closed itself instantly, leaving only 2 faint silvery scars. Vincent stood up, pulling her up with him. He looked like a dark god reborn, radiating absolute terrifying authority. The surviving mercenaries whimpered, pressing their faces to the floor. He turned his gaze to Victoria. She let out a pathetic sob, sliding down the wall. "Please, Eliza." She begged, her arrogance entirely broken. "We're sisters. We share a family. Please don't let him kill me." Eliza walked over to her, looking down at the girl who had tormented her for her entire life. She felt no anger anymore, only a profound, heavy pity. "We are not sisters, Victoria," Eliza said coldly. "And I don't want you dead. Death is too easy for you." She turned to Alistair, who had just returned to the room, covered in the blood of the men he had slaughtered in the halls. "Alistair, have Vanguard Security's private transports impounded. Wire the survivors $10,000 each and tell them if they ever return to the East Coast, they will be hunted down and flayed alive." Alistair bowed deeply. "Yes, my queen." As for her, Eliza pointed at Victoria. "Vincent's wealth built the Montgomery Empire. I want it dismantled. Call Arthur's creditors, trigger the default clauses on the Montgomery shipping loans, liquidate their assets, seize the Beacon Hill estate, and freeze their offshore accounts. Let my father and Eleanor face the SEC and the IRS with absolutely nothing." Victoria sobbed hysterically. "No, you can't take our money. We'll be ruined. We'll be on the streets." "Welcome to the real world, Victoria," Eliza whispered. "You are officially banished from the immortal realm. Live a long, wonderfully mundane, destitute human life." As the guards dragged a screaming, thrashing Victoria away, the heavy silence returned. The war was over. The Southern Coven was broken. The Montgomery family was eradicated from high society, and the throne of the East was secure. Vincent wrapped his arms around Eliza from behind, burying his face in the crook of her neck. "You are going to make a terrifyingly brilliant ruler," he murmured. "Vincent," Eliza said softly, turning in his arms to look up at his perfect, immortal face. "I'm tired of being fragile. I'm tired of being the mortal weakness they can use against you." His silver eyes searched hers, understanding dawning on his features. "Eliza, are you sure eternity is a heavy burden?" "Only if you carry it alone," she replied, tracing his jawline. "I was born to be your equal. Finish it. Turn me." Vincent's expression softened into an ocean of pure, endless love. He lifted her effortlessly into his arms, carrying her out of the ruined command center and toward their private chambers. The transition would be painful. It would take 3 days of fever and darkness. But on the other side, she would wake up immortal. "I have waited a lifetime for you, my queen," he whispered as he laid her on the silk sheets, his fangs grazing the pulse point of her throat. "Let us begin forever." And as his fangs pierced her skin, bringing the ultimate darkness, Eliza didn't feel fear. She felt perfectly undeniably at home. Did Eliza's revenge on her toxic stepfamily satisfy your cravings for justice, or did you want the Vampire King to show them no mercy? Let me know in the comments below. If you loved this dramatic tale of hidden bloodlines, billionaire vampires, and ultimate betrayals, hit that like button and share the story with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another thrilling supernatural romance. What should our next dark romance be about? Drop your wild ideas down below. See you in the next video.